Hi there, I'm Doug Johnstone and this is my book, A Dark Matter, which has been shortlisted for the McIlvanney Prize this year. It's my 11th novel and it's the first book in a projected trilogy, at least, of books about the Skelf women, which are three generations of women from the same family, the Skelf family, who at the start of the book have to take over the running of a funeral directors and the private investigators when the patriarch of the family, Jim, dies. So A Dark Matter is the first book in that series, and the second one, The Big Chill, came out just last month, and the third book hopefully is going to come out in the middle of next year. So in this book we have Dorothy, who is 70 years old. She's really the matriarch of the family, and Jenny, who is 45 years old, and Hannah, who is 20 years old, and she's obviously Jenny's daughter and Dorothy's granddaughter. And so the book starts with the death of Jim. It's Dorothy's husband, Jenny's dad, obviously, and it really follows the three women as they deal with their own grief and have to help other people with their grief, bury the dead, and try and help the living as investigator cases land on their laps and they have to solve mysteries. So very often we get asked where you get your ideas from. That's the most common question you get as writers, and for this book, for these series of books, there's a couple of really obvious starting points. One was that I was writer in residence at funeral directors a few years ago, and while there was absolutely no intention while I was there of using any of that experience in my fiction writing, I actually ended up writing a small non-fiction book about that, about the staff and their experiences. But it kind of nagged away at the back of my mind for a long time, and at the same time, for years and years, I have been kicking around an idea of a central character of a middle-aged woman who has to take over the running of a private investigator firm and has no idea how to do it. So I just kind of thought at one point, look, I'm just going to mush these two together and see what happens, and throw a bunch of other ideas in there, like ideas about drumming and about physics, stuff, both of which I know about from my own experience. And because it's dealing with death every day, there are obviously big existential questions about life, the universe and everything and all that stuff. So I'm just going to read a couple little short sections. The first one is just right from the start of the book. In fact, it's only a page, but this is from Jenny's point of view. I don't think I need any introduction because it should be pretty obvious. Her dad took much longer to burn than she expected. Jenny watched the deep flames lick his body, curl around his chest and crotch, whisper in his ear. His thin hair crisped, then turned to smoke. Grey sinewy strands reached into the mottled sky. A sprig of juniper in his hand caught a light and threw out blue sparks, and Jenny smelt the scent, reminding her of gin. The spruce and pine logs packed around Jim's body were blazing bright and hard. The fire had destroyed his suit already, and his skin was tightening around the bones as moisture evaporated from his body. But still, it seemed to take a long time. The funeral pyre wasn't much more than a makeshift oversized barbecue, 2 rows of concrete breeze blocks with a metal grill suspended between them. Underneath was a long silver tray borrowed from the embalming room which they would use to gather his remains once the pieces were small enough to fall through the grate. Archie had been working on the pyre in the garden ever since Dorothy announced what her husband's last wishes were. It was contrary, Jenny had to admit. Her dad spent 45 years orchestrating the funerals of thousands of people, arranging music and flowers, orders of service, funeral cars and sermons, making sure every detail was right for the bereaved, ensuring all rival factions got what they wanted and the deceased was sent off in style. And yet his own funeral was the opposite. A pyre in their back garden, no speeches, no sermons, no friends or flowers or ceremony, just the 5 of them standing next to the throbbing heat of an illegal fire. So, cheery stuff. I'm just going to flick ahead. So the book is split evenly between the three women. They each, you get all three of their points of view. And so here is a section from Dorothy's point of view not long after this cremation has taken place. Dorothy stood in the embalming room and stared at what was left of Jim. An outdoor funeral pyre doesn't reach the temperature of a cremation oven, a couple of 100 degrees lower, so his remains were chunkier than they usually got back from crematoriums. Also, crems sift the remaining bone fragments and pulverise them in a cremulator, so the bereaved get a nice pile of grey sand for scattering. In comparison, the bone fragments and dust in front of her were real, and it was dust, not ashes. That was a misnomer. She was thankful that the fire hadn't left any large bones for her to deal with, nothing longer than a few inches amongst the dirt. She imagined lifting an intact skull from the pile, addressing it like Hamlet, or one of Jim's femurs, waving it around like a cave woman. She looked up from the table. It was too bright for this, but it was a workplace after all. Archie needed plenty of light. Apart from Jim on the table, the place was spotless. Archie always made sure of that. The 6 body fridges along one wall hummed, the names and details of the dead inside written on magnetic cards stuck to the front of each fridge. Hartford, 5'11", viewing required, embalming needed, no jewellery, removed from the Western General. It tied in with the whiteboard upstairs, and for a moment Dorothy had a flash of the business as a giant single organism. She turned back Jim's remains, picked up a 4-inch shard of white bone. It was as light as balsa wood but solid, all the organic content and moisture vaporised. She held it up to the light, turned it in her fingers. It had one straight edge and one gently curved, and it was wider at one end than the other, with a round indentation at the wide end, like it might have been a socket for a ball joint. The narrow end was sharp, and she pushed her thumb against it, felt the pain. She kept pushing until it broke the skin, watched as a droplet of her blood spread along the tip of the bone, darkening it. She sucked her thumb and put the bone in the pocket of her cardigan. She thought of all the atoms from Jim's body now floating in the sky across Edinburgh, rising into the upper reaches of the atmosphere. She thought of other atoms from his pyre dropping onto the soil in their garden, their neighbours' gardens. She thought of the atoms in the brush Archie used to tidy up, the atoms stuck in her own hair, on her clothes, her shoes, in her nose and ears and throat. She licked her pinky finger and dipped it in the dust on the tray, then sucked it. He tasted of bonfires and dirt.